So Etsy's put a reserve on your shop? First of all, don't panic. There's usually a very good reason why they've done that. And when I say very good reason, I mean, as far as they're concerned, there's a very good reason. So let's figure out why that's happened and how you can fix it. By the way, my name's Jess. I've been selling on Etsy successfully since 2008, and I've been helping other makers just like you start and grow thriving handmade businesses in their spare time since 2010. Now, I know the feeling because it's happened to me too. Earlier this year, I woke up to a notification in my Etsy shop that Etsy had put my shop in reserve. Did I mention I've been selling there since 2008 in this same shop? Yeah, so I was also confused as to why this was happening. I'd always been in good standing with Etsy. I'd never had any issues. So why the hell did they put my shop in reserve? Well, after doing a little bit of investigating, we actually discovered something a little bit annoying. See, what had happened to us is that we started doing tracked shipping a couple of years ago, thanks to Star Seller and various other reasons. But what had happened a couple of times in our listings when we went back and explored is that when we'd entered the tracking code, for some reason, it had defaulted from like an Australia Post tracking code to a FedEx tracking code, which was invalid. And so the tracking on those orders was actually invalid, and we hadn't realized that this was happening. Therefore, Etsy actually put a reserve on my account because some of the tracking hadn't shown delivered. We had tracking info in there, but because it was incorrect, it never actually came through as being delivered. So it looked like some of our items hadn't been delivered, even though I'd had reviews from those customers because they'd gotten their items ages ago. And so when we realized that had happened, we're like, oh, this is annoying, but also now we know there's an issue and we can avoid this happening ever again. So there are a couple of reasons why your shop might be put in an Etsy reserve. It might not be something you realize that you've done, like happened to us. So the two most common reasons that Etsy would put your shop in reserve is that you don't have tracking on all of your items, therefore they can't tell that something's been delivered or not. And if your orders aren't dispatched on time, if you're not keeping up with your on-time delivery, that might be another reason that they've put a reserve on your shop. However, those are not the only reasons. There are a couple more. Number one, you're a new seller. This happens like clockwork to new sellers. So if that's you, do not panic. This is very normal. It also can happen if you've gone a long period without making any sales and then you suddenly start making sales again. It can also happen if you get a sudden spike in sales that is out of the realm of your normal sales volume. And it can happen to you if your shop has a history of low reviews. And as I proved, this can happen at any stage in your journey. It can happen at the beginning, in the middle, like you could have been a seller for like 16 years like I have been, and it can still happen to you if any of these things become true in your shop. Now, why does this happen at all? Why does Etsy do this to us? Basically, they instituted this a few years ago to try to reduce the amount of scammers and spammers on the platform. What was happening is someone would open a new shop, they would make a whole bunch of sales, and then they would disappear without fulfilling those orders and take their money with them. Therefore, Etsy has put a few things in place to try to reduce this happening to people, one of which is the institution of payment reserves when your shop meets any of these reasons. Another one is the whole new sign-up process you have to go through now, where you have to pay a fee and you have to put like official government ID in so you can prove you are who you say you are, so you can't pretend to be someone else. Now, an important thing to know about reserves is that you won't necessarily have all of your money in reserve. It might only be a percentage of your sales that are in reserve, and that can actually shift over time. So basically, they might put X amount or percentage of your sales in reserve, and then when your orders are tracked or delivered, they might then release that money, and that might be an ongoing process for a while. So it might fluctuate a bit until they take the reserve off completely. So you won't necessarily not get any money during this time, but you might get less than you would have if the reserve wasn't there, but you will always get the money in the end. Because they don't take the money away, they're just holding in a reserve. And they're holding in a reserve to cover any fees that you have incurred, so that if you do suddenly shut your shop, then you don't just disappear and not pay your fees. Now, I know obviously watching this, you're a good person, you're not going to do that. They're not doing this to hurt you, they're doing this to protect themselves against bad actors. Okay, so if this has happened to you, the best thing to do is to go through all of these things and go, okay, have I done any of these things? Are any of these things happening in my shop? If so, can I fix them in any way, or do I just have to write it out until this kind of passes me by? and then they will take the reserve away. And if this hasn't happened to you and you're watching this because you don't want it to happen to you, here's how to avoid it. Number one, put tracking on all of your orders and or use Etsy shipping labels for your orders. Number two, make sure to always dispatch within your stated dispatch times. If something happens and you have to push back a dispatch date, you can fix that. You can go into the order and you can actually alter the dispatch date and let your customer know that this thing is going to be dispatched a bit later. So by actually shifting the date back, you're not going to come a cropper of this issue. Only mark your items as dispatched when they're actually dispatched. Don't do that thing where you're like, oh yes, I've dispatched it, but then take it to the post office 3 days later. No, only dispatch it when you've actually given it to the shipping company and it's logged into their system. Make sure to stay up to date with seller policies so that you aren't accidentally breaking a rule that you haven't noticed that you're breaking. Make sure to have excellent customer service and strive for good reviews so you don't get a run of bad reviews that might encourage Etsy to put your shop on reserve. And finally, think about trying to qualify for Star Seller. Now, Etsy has stated that if your shop is a Star Seller shop, you will not have a reserve place in your account. I've heard some people say otherwise, that they are Star Sellers and have had this happen, but as far as Etsy has said, it shouldn't happen if you are a Star Seller. So has this happened to you? What was the reason? What happened in your shop? Thinking about what I've talked about in this video, what was going on in there that encouraged Etsy to put you in to a reserve? For a lot of you, it's probably just the fact you're a new shop and they're just protecting themselves by making sure that you're not one of these scam shops that just pops up and then disappears. And if that's the case, there's nothing you can really do except just ride it out, keep going, keep making sales, keep working on shop, and eventually they'll realize you're genuine and they will take the reserve away. If it's any of these other reasons, hopefully that's something you can work on and improve so that it doesn't happen again, like we had to do. Now, if you are a new seller or a seller who's confused about Etsy fees, I recommend you check this video out next, where I explain the Etsy fees in detail and break them down for you so you are not surprised about the fees that are coming your way. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you again in the next video, and goodbye for now.